He squeezed my hand in the ICU. Only 3 days. Finally, everything's mine. He thought I was asleep. That squeeze, those words, would be the last mistake Harold Morgan ever made.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
The beeping of the monitors had become my heartbeat. 47 days in this hospital bed. 47 days of tubes and needles and the slow drip of chemicals that were supposed to save my life. The doctors said pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. They gave me 3 months, maybe 4, with aggressive treatment. Harold had been counting every single day. I kept my eyes closed when he entered the room. I'd learned to recognize his footsteps over 42 years of marriage, the heavy tread of a man who believed the world owed him something. He walked differently now, lighter, almost eager. The footsteps of a man who could see the finish line. Kathleen. He said my name the way he always did, with that thin veneer of concern that fooled everyone except me. How are you feeling today, sweetheart? I didn't respond. I'd stopped responding 3 days ago, letting him think the medication was pulling me under, letting him believe I was already gone in all the ways that mattered. It was easier to pretend, easier to lie still and listen. Harold sat in the chair beside my bed. I heard the leather creak, smelled the cologne he'd started wearing again. Tom Ford. Expensive. The cologne he used to wear when he came home late from business dinners that I later learned were dinners with Jennifer Blake at the Ritz-Carlton uptown. The doctors say it won't be long now. His voice was soft, almost gentle, almost believable. I want you to know that I'll take care of everything. The house, the investments, Rebecca. You don't have to worry about anything. Rebecca, our daughter. The daughter Harold had systematically pushed away for 15 years, convincing her that I was the difficult one, that I was the reason our family didn't work. The daughter who had finally seen through his lies and was now my only ally in what was coming. Harold took my hand. His fingers were warm, dry, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. 42 years of this hand. 42 years of believing it belonged to a man who loved me. Only 3 days, he whispered, so quiet I almost missed it. Only 3 days, and finally everything's mine. He squeezed my hand. A gentle squeeze, the kind a loving husband might give a dying wife. Except I heard the triumph in his voice. I felt the eagerness in his grip. He wasn't mourning me. He was counting down. I kept my breathing steady, kept my face slack. Let him think the drugs had pulled me under completely. Harold stood. I heard him walk to the window, heard him pull out his phone, the beep of a text message being sent. Soon, he said to himself, or maybe to whoever was on the other end of that message. Jennifer, probably. The woman he'd been sleeping with since I was 52 years old. The woman who was waiting to become the second Mrs. Morgan the moment I was in the ground. The door opened and closed. His footsteps faded down the hallway. I waited 60 seconds, then 90, then 2 full minutes before I opened my eyes. The ICU room was exactly as I remembered it. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a window overlooking the parking garage. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The IV dripped its poison into my veins. Everything was the same as it had been for 47 days. Except now, I knew the truth. Now, I had heard it from his own lips. 3 days. Harold thought I had 3 days left. He thought he was about to inherit $8.7 million in real estate, investments, and the banking fortune my father had left me when he died. He thought Jennifer Blake was about to become a very rich woman's replacement. He was wrong about all of it. I reached under the thin hospital mattress, my fingers finding the edge of the smartphone Samantha had hidden there 2 weeks ago. Samantha Torres, the night nurse who had seen Harold's cruelty when he thought no one was watching. The way he snapped at me when I asked for water. The way he rolled his eyes when the doctors gave updates. The way he checked his watch instead of holding my hand during the worst of the treatments. Samantha had approached me on a Tuesday, her voice low and careful. Mrs. Morgan, I've worked in oncology for 15 years. I know what a loving husband looks like. Your husband isn't that. She was right. She was more right than she knew. The phone was a burner, prepaid, untraceable. I'd memorized the only number stored in its contacts. Patricia Webb, attorney at law, specialist in estate planning and testamentary revocation. We'd been planning this for 6 weeks, ever since the diagnosis, ever since I realized that Harold's concern was theater and his love was a lie. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Kathleen? Patricia's voice was calm, professional, ready. We'd rehearsed this call a dozen times. Execute phase 2 now. Are you certain? Once we begin, there's no going back. I looked at the door Harold had just walked through. 42 years of marriage. 42 years of believing I was loved. 42 years of building a life with a man who was waiting for me to die so he could take everything I'd earned. I'm certain the notary will be there within the hour. Rebecca is already on her way. Do you have the recording? I touched the phone's screen, found the voice memo app and pressed play. Harold's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. Only 3 days, and finally everything's mine. I have it. Then we proceed. Phase 2 is active. I ended the call and slipped the phone back under the mattress. The monitors beeped. The IV dripped. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of the hospital, the footsteps and voices and mechanical hums of a place designed to keep people alive. Harold thought I was dying. He thought 3 days from now, he would be a wealthy widower with a younger girlfriend and no obligations. He thought 42 years of lies had finally paid off. He was about to learn what happened when a dying woman had nothing left to lose. I closed my eyes and waited. The memories came unbidden, the way they always did in the quiet hours. Our wedding day, June 1982, a garden ceremony at my parents' estate in Charleston. Harold had been handsome then, charming in a way that made my mother nervous and my father suspicious. They'd both been right to worry. They'd both been dead before I understood why. The early years weren't terrible. That was the hardest part to accept. Harold had been a good husband in the beginning, or good enough that I couldn't tell the difference. He worked long hours at his consulting firm. He came home tired. He said he loved me, and I believed him because I didn't know what else to believe. Rebecca was born in 1986. I'd wanted more children, but Harold said one was enough. He said we couldn't afford it, even though my father had left me enough money to raise 10 children comfortably. He said our family was complete, and I accepted it because that's what wives did in those days. We accepted. The control came slowly, so slowly I didn't recognize it for what it was. Harold managed our finances because he was better with numbers. Harold chose our friends because his colleagues were more suitable. Harold decided where we lived, what we drove, how we decorated the house, what charities we supported. By the time I realized I'd lost my voice, I'd forgotten what it sounded like. The affair with Jennifer started in 2009. I didn't find out until 2022, when I discovered a box of letters in his study while he was at a conference. 15 years of love letters, anniversary cards, vacation photos I'd never seen. 15 years of a parallel life I knew nothing about. I should have left him then. I should have taken the letters to a lawyer and ended it. But I was 65 years old, I'd been married for 40 years, and I didn't know how to be anything other than Harold Morgan's wife. So I stayed. I pretended I didn't know. I watched him more carefully, saw the lies I'd been too blind to notice before. The late nights, the business trips, the phone calls he took in the garage, the cologne he wore for her, the smile he saved for her, and then the diagnosis came, and everything changed. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 3 months? Maybe 4. Aggressive treatment might buy more time, but the odds weren't good. I sat in the oncologist's office and listened to my death sentence, and all I could think about was Harold's face when I told him. He tried to look sad. He tried to look devastated. But I saw the calculation behind his eyes, the quick mental arithmetic of a man who was already spending my money. He held my hand in the car on the way home, and I felt nothing but revulsion. That night, I called Rebecca. Our daughter, the one Harold had convinced me was ungrateful and selfish and not worth the effort. The daughter I'd let him push away because fighting him was too exhausting. Mom? Her voice was cautious, surprised. We hadn't spoken in months. I need to tell you something, and I need your help. I told her everything. The cancer, the prognosis, the letters from Jennifer Blake. I told her about the control, the manipulation, the 42 years of a marriage that had been a prison dressed up as a partnership. I told her I was dying, and I told her I wasn't going to let Harold win. Rebecca cried. Then she got angry. Then she said the words I'd needed to hear for 15 years. Mom, I'm on your side. Tell me what to do. Phase 2 had been her idea. The notary, the revocation, the dramatic reveal in the hospital room. Rebecca had spent 2 decades watching her father manipulate people, and she'd learned every trick. Now she was using those tricks against him. The door opened. I closed my eyes, expecting Harold, but the footsteps were wrong. Lighter. Faster. The click of professional heels on linoleum. Mrs. Morgan? I opened my eyes. Samantha Torres stood in the doorway, her scrubs slightly rumpled, her expression carefully neutral. They're here, she said. The lawyer and the notary. Your daughter is with them. They're waiting in the conference room on the 3rd floor. I sat up in bed, ignoring the protest of my muscles, the tug of the IV line. The world swam for a moment, then steadied. Help me stand. Samantha crossed the room and took my arm. Are you sure you're strong enough? I have to be. She helped me to my feet. My legs trembled, but held. 47 days in bed had weakened me more than I'd realized, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. Not now. Not when I was this close. The wheelchair is outside, Samantha said. I'll take you down myself. Your husband went to the cafeteria. He said he'd be back in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That was more than enough time. I let Samantha guide me to the door, my hospital gown swishing against my legs, my bare feet cold on the floor. In 20 minutes, the documents would be signed. In 20 minutes, Harold Morgan would lose everything he'd been waiting for. In 20 minutes, the dying wife would show her husband exactly what she was capable of. The letters were the key to everything. I found them on a Sunday afternoon in March, 3 months before the diagnosis, while Harold was at a golf tournament in Pinehurst. They were hidden in a shoebox at the back of his study closet, behind old tax returns and dusty files he thought I'd never touch. 147 letters, 15 years of correspondence between my husband and Jennifer Blake, the woman I'd met exactly once at a company Christmas party in 2011. She'd been introduced as a client consultant, a title vague enough to mean anything. Harold had shaken her hand with the professional detachment of a stranger. They'd already been sleeping together for 2 years by then. I sat on the floor of his study and read every single letter. It took me 6 hours. By the end, my hands were shaking and my vision was blurred with tears I refused to let fall. The letters told a story I'd been too blind to see. Harold had met Jennifer at a conference in Atlanta in 2009. She was 34, recently divorced, working as a marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company. He was 54, married for 27 years, bored in the way wealthy men convince themselves they're entitled to be. Their affair had started slowly, according to the letters. Coffee meetings, long lunches, a hotel room in Nashville during a business trip. I remembered him taking that fall. Jennifer wrote about feeling guilty at first, about knowing what they were doing was wrong, but Harold had convinced her, the same way he'd convinced me of so many things over the years. Your marriage is dead, he'd told her. Kathleen and I are partners, not lovers. We stay together for appearances, for our daughter. But you're the one I want. You've always been the one I want. I read that line over and over, trying to understand how words could lie so completely. Harold and I had been intimate just the week before he wrote that letter. He'd told me he loved me that same night. The letters evolved over the years. The early guilt faded into routine. Jennifer wrote about vacations they'd taken together. Trips Harold had told me were conferences in Chicago, Boston, San Diego. She wrote about the apartment he'd rented for her in uptown Charlotte, the one he paid for with cash from an account I didn't know existed. She wrote about their plans for the future. When Kathleen is gone, we'll finally be free. I know it's terrible to think about, but I can't help imagining what our life will be like. The house in Charleston, the trips to Europe, the life you deserve. I'll be the wife you should have had all along. When Kathleen is gone, not when the divorce is final, not when we separate, when I was gone, dead, out of the way. I put the letters back in the shoebox. I put the shoebox back in the closet. I walked out of Harold's study, went to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. For 3 days, I said nothing. I smiled at Harold when he came home from Pinehurst. I asked about his golf game. I made dinner, watched television, slept beside him in the bed we'd shared for 4 decades. I played the role of the oblivious wife, the same role I'd been playing without knowing it for 15 years. On the 4th day, I called Rebecca. "Mom?" She sounded surprised to hear from me. We'd spoken less and less over the years, pushed apart by Harold's subtle manipulations. He'd always found ways to make her feel unwelcome, to create friction between us, to convince me that our daughter was the problem. "I need to see you. Can you come to Charlotte this weekend?" "Is everything okay?" "But I'd rather explain in person." She came. She sat in my kitchen while Harold was at work, and I showed her the letters. I watched her face change as she read them, watched the anger build behind her eyes. 15 years, she said when she finished. 15 years, and you had no idea. I had no idea about any of it. The affair, the apartment, the plans for after I'm dead. Mom, you have to leave him. It's not that simple. I poured more tea, buying time. Everything is in his name. The house, the investments, even the money my father left me. Harold set it up that way years ago, said it was better for taxes. I was too trusting to question it. Then we'll fight it. We'll get lawyers, forensic accountants. We'll prove he manipulated you. That could take years. And in the meantime, he'd make my life hell. He'd cut me off completely, the way he cut you off. Rebecca looked at the letters spread across my kitchen table. "So, what do you want to do?" "I don't know yet. But I'm not going to let him get away with this. I'm not going to die knowing that he wins." I hadn't known about the cancer then. I hadn't known how literal that statement would become. The diagnosis came 6 weeks later. I'd been having stomach pains, fatigue, weight loss I couldn't explain. Harold insisted I see a doctor, which should have been my first warning. He'd never cared about my health before. Patterson's face told me everything before he opened his mouth. Pancreatic cancer? Stage 4. The tumor had already spread to my liver and lymph nodes. He talked about treatment options, palliative care, quality of life versus quantity. I sat in his office and felt the world collapse around me. Harold was waiting in the lobby when I came out. He took my arm, guided me to the car, drove me home in silence. That night, he held me while I cried. He said all the right things. He was the perfect supportive husband. But I saw his eyes. I saw the calculation behind the sympathy. I saw the man who had written to his mistress about life after I was gone, now seeing his plans finally coming true. The next morning, I called Patricia Webb. Patricia had been a year behind me at Duke, a driven young woman who'd become one of the most respected estate attorneys in North Carolina. We'd lost touch over the decades, but she remembered me. She agreed to meet. I told her everything: the letters, the affair, the cancer. I told her about the money Harold had transferred into his name, the life insurance policies he'd convinced me to sign, the will that left everything to him with a pittance for Rebecca. I told her I wanted to change it all before I died. "That's going to be complicated," Patricia said. "Most of these assets are legally in his name. Contesting that would take time you don't have. Then what can I do?" "There's one thing that's still entirely yours. The trust your father established before he died. Harold can't touch it without your explicit written consent." I'd forgotten about my father's trust. Harold had told me years ago that it had been depleted, that the money was gone. Another lie I'd believed without question. "How much is in the trust?" Patricia checked her files. $8.7 million, give or take. Your father was smarter than Harold gave him credit for. The trust was structured to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation. $8.7 million, more than enough to take care of Rebecca, to fund medical treatment, to live out whatever time I had left in comfort and dignity. More than enough to make sure Harold never saw a penny. I want to revoke his access. I want to write him out completely. We can do that. But Kathleen, if you do this while you're still alive, he'll contest it. He'll claim you were mentally incapacitated, that the cancer affected your judgment. It could tie up the estate for years. So what do you suggest? Patricia leaned forward, her eyes sharp. We wait. We prepare all the documents in secret. We find witnesses who can testify to your mental competence. And we execute the revocation at a moment when Harold can't possibly argue you didn't know what you were doing. What kind of moment? That depends on Harold. What would make him reveal his true intentions? What would make him say something so incriminating that no court could ignore it? I thought about the letters, about Jennifer Blake, about the apartment uptown and the trips to Europe they'd planned after I was dead. He's waiting for me to die, I said slowly. He's counting the days. If I were near the end, if he thought I couldn't hear him, he might say something. Patricia nodded. Then we give him the opportunity. We wait for him to confess. And when he does, we execute the revocation right in front of him. It was a gamble. Harold might never say anything incriminating. He might be too careful, too smart. But Patricia didn't know my husband the way I did. She didn't know how arrogant he was, how certain he was that he'd already won. He'll do it, I said. He won't be able to help himself. We spent the next 6 weeks preparing. Patricia drafted the revocation documents. Rebecca gathered evidence of Harold's affair, the apartment, the secret accounts. Samantha agreed to hide the phone in my mattress, to watch for the moment when Harold let his guard down. I endured the chemotherapy, the nausea, the weakness that came with fighting a disease that was slowly killing me. I let Harold play the concerned husband. I let him count the days. I let him believe he was winning. And then, 47 days into my hospital stay, he squeezed my hand and whispered the words I'd been waiting for. Only 3 days. Finally, everything's mine. Phase 2 had begun. The doctors at Carolina's Medical Center were nothing if not thorough. They ran every test, checked every marker, consulted every specialist. And every time they delivered bad news, Harold was there to receive it with practiced concern. We're looking at weeks, not months, Dr. Patterson told us in early October. The tumor isn't responding to chemotherapy the way we'd hoped. We can continue treatment, but I want you both to understand what we're facing. Harold nodded gravely. His hand found mine on the hospital bed, squeezing with what anyone else would have seen as supportive affection. Whatever Kathleen wants, he said. I just want her to be comfortable. Comfortable. The word sat in my stomach like a stone. Harold wanted me comfortable because comfortable patients didn't fight. Comfortable patients accepted their fate and died quietly, leaving their estates in order and their husbands free to move on. I want to continue treatment, I said. Harold's grip tightened almost imperceptibly. Sweetheart, are you sure? The doctor said. I heard what the doctor said. I want to keep fighting. Patterson looked between us, sensing something beneath the surface. That's certainly your choice, Mrs. Morgan. We can adjust the protocol, try a different combination of drugs, but I want to be realistic about expectations. I understand. When do we start? The new treatment began 3 days later. It was brutal, more brutal than the first round. I spent hours in the infusion center, chemicals dripping into my veins, nurses checking my vitals every 15 minutes. Harold came to some of the sessions, but not all. He had business to attend to, he said. Jennifer Blake, I assumed. I didn't mind his absences. They gave me time to think, to plan, to talk with Rebecca on the phone hidden in my purse. We refined the details of Phase 2, working out exactly when and how the revocation would happen. You need to be completely lucid, Patricia warned during one of our calls. If Harold can argue you were confused or medicated, he might have grounds to contest. I'll be lucid. I'm always lucid. The cancer hasn't touched my mind. Good. And you need witnesses. The more, the better. The notary is legally sufficient, but having additional observers makes it harder to challenge. I have Samantha. She's seen everything Harold does when he thinks no one is watching. The nurse? She'd be willing to testify? She offered. She said she's watched too many dying patients be mistreated by family members waiting for inheritance. She wants to help. The weeks passed. I grew weaker, but my mind stayed sharp. I memorized the revocation documents, practiced what I would say, rehearsed the moment when I would open my eyes and show Harold exactly what he'd married. Meanwhile, Harold grew more impatient. I could see it in the way he checked his watch during visits, the way he pressed the doctors for updates on my condition. "How long?" he asked once, thinking I was asleep. "Realistically, how long are we looking at? These things are hard to predict," Dr. Patterson said. "Could be weeks, could be days." Days. Harold repeated the word like a prayer. That night, after he left, I called Rebecca. "He's getting antsy," I said. "He keeps asking the doctors about timing." "Good. That means he's ready to slip up. I want you to be here when it happens. I want you to see his face." "Mom, I wouldn't miss it for anything." The final piece fell into place on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my room, monitors beeping their eternal rhythm, when Harold arrived with a stack of papers. "Sweetheart, I hate to bother you with this, but our financial advisor says we need to update some documents. Just routine stuff, nothing to worry about." He set the papers on my bedside table. I glanced at them through half-closed eyes, recognizing the letterhead of Harold's law firm. Power of attorney forms, healthcare proxies, authorization to access accounts I didn't know I still controlled. "What are these?" I asked, my voice deliberately weak. "Just some updated paperwork. The lawyer said it's better to have everything in order, given your situation." "I'm too tired to read all this." "That's fine. You don't have to read it. Just sign where I've marked and I'll take care of the rest." I looked at my husband of 42 years, the man who had stood beside me at the altar and promised to love me until death. The man who was now asking me to sign away whatever rights I had left. "Can you read them to me? I can't focus on small print." Harold's jaw tightened. Just for a moment. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Of course, sweetheart. Let me get my glasses." He read the documents in the patronizing tone he'd always used when explaining things he thought I couldn't understand. Power of attorney giving him full control over my financial decisions. Healthcare proxy authorizing him to make medical choices on my behalf. Authorization to access my father's trust. There it was. The thing he'd wanted all along. "The trust?" I said. "I thought you said that money was gone." Harold paused. I saw him recalculating, adjusting his story. "Well, not gone exactly. There's still a small amount remaining. This just allows me to manage it properly, make sure it's being invested correctly. You don't want it sitting there earning nothing while we're dealing with all this." "How much is in the trust?" "I don't know exactly. A few $100,000 maybe. $8.7 million. He was lying about the amount, just as he'd lied about everything else. "I need to think about it," I said. "My head hurts. Can we do this tomorrow?" "Kathleen, the lawyer says these need to be filed by the end of the week." "Tomorrow." I closed my eyes, letting my head fall back against the pillow. "I'm too tired today." Harold stood there for a long moment. I could feel his frustration radiating across the room, the impatience of a man who was so close to his goal he could taste it. "Of course," he said finally. "We'll do it tomorrow. You rest." He gathered the papers and left without kissing my forehead, without squeezing my hand, without any of the performative gestures he'd been maintaining for the doctors and nurses. Just walked out, his mask slipping the moment he thought I couldn't see. I waited until his footsteps faded, then pulled out the phone. "Patricia, he brought documents today. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, access to the trust. Did you sign anything?" I told him I was too tired. "Good. That was smart." Patricia paused. "Kathleen, this is escalating. He's getting desperate." "I know. That means he's ready." "Are you sure you want to wait? We could execute the revocation now, catch him off guard." "I want him to say it. I want to hear him admit what he's been planning, and I want it on recording so no court in the world can dismiss it." That night, I lay awake in my hospital bed, watching the city lights through my window. 42 years of marriage, reduced to this. A dying woman with a hidden phone, waiting for her husband to confess that he was counting the days until she was dead. Harold came back the next morning, but he didn't mention the documents. He sat in his chair, scrolled through his phone, made small talk about the weather and the traffic. He was different now, more careful. Maybe he sensed something was wrong. Maybe he'd decided to be patient a little longer. I was patient too. I'd been patient for 42 years. 3 more days passed. My condition worsened, or appeared to. I stopped eating, let myself grow weaker, played the part of a woman on her deathbed. Harold visited less frequently, but when he came, he stayed longer, watching, waiting, counting. On the fourth day, Dr. Patterson delivered his final prognosis. "I'm sorry," he said, Harold standing behind him like a vulture waiting for carrion. "The scans show significant progression. We're looking at days now, not weeks." Harold nodded solemnly, but I saw his eyes. I saw the light behind them, the barely contained anticipation of a man who was finally getting what he wanted. That night, after the doctors left, Harold sat beside my bed and took my hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he said. "I wish there was something more they could do." I kept my eyes closed, my breathing shallow, my body limp. Harold leaned closer. I felt his breath on my ear. "Only 3 days now," he whispered. "Only 3 days. And finally everything's mine." I didn't move, didn't react. Just let those words sink into my memory. Let them burn themselves onto the recording that was running under my mattress. He squeezed my hand one more time, then stood and walked out. I heard him laugh in the hallway, heard him make a phone call, heard fragments of a conversation with someone whose name I didn't need to guess. 3 days. Yes, I'm sure. We'll finally be together. I opened my eyes. It was time. Patricia's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, but she came to me. She brought everything we needed: the documents, the stamps, the legal authority to undo 42 years of Harold's careful manipulation. She spread them across my hospital bed like a battle plan, which is exactly what they were. "The revocation of trust access," she said, pointing to the first stack. "This removes Harold as beneficiary and transfers full control to you and Rebecca. It's backdated to before your hospitalization, which is legal because you never actually signed away your rights. He just convinced you that you had. What about the other assets? The house, the investments? That's more complicated. Most of those are legally in his name, and contesting that would take years. But the trust is the big prize. $8.7 million that Harold thought he'd already won." I looked at the documents. Pages of legal language that represented everything I should have done decades ago. Everything I was finally doing now. "Walk me through the timeline again." Patricia sat in the chair beside my bed, the same chair Harold usually occupied. She was shorter than him, lighter, her presence somehow filling less space, but her eyes were sharper. Phase 2 has 3 stages. First, the recording. You've already captured Harold's statement about 3 days. That's our insurance policy. Proof that he was anticipating your death for financial gain. What if he claims I misheard? That he meant something else? He won't. The recording is clear, and combined with the letters from Jennifer Blake and the testimony of witnesses like Samantha, it establishes a pattern of behavior. But the recording is just the beginning. Stage 2? The revocation itself. The notary is prepared to come at any time, day or night. When you give the signal, he'll be here within 30 minutes with all the proper seals and authorizations. You'll sign the documents in front of him and at least 2 witnesses. Everything will be legally binding the moment you put pen to paper. And stage 3? Patricia smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Stage 3 is the confrontation. Harold returns to your room expecting to find a dying wife. Instead, he finds the notary, the witnesses, and a stack of documents that prove he's just lost everything. I imagined Harold's face. The confusion giving way to understanding. The understanding giving way to rage. 42 years of careful planning, undone in a single afternoon. "He'll fight it," I said. "He'll claim I was manipulated, that Rebecca and I conspired against him." "Let him. The documents are airtight, the witnesses are credible, and the recording makes it impossible to argue that you were anything other than a woman protecting herself from a husband who was waiting for her to die." Rebecca arrived that evening. She came through the door like she was walking into battle. Her face set in the determined expression I remembered from her childhood. She'd been a fighter even then, stubborn and fierce, qualities Harold had spent years trying to suppress. "Mom." She crossed to my bed and took my hand. Her grip was strong, steady, Nothing like Harold's performative squeezes. "How are you feeling?" "Ready. I'm ready to be done with this." She nodded. Patricia explained everything. "I'm here as a witness. Whatever you need. I need you to stay hidden until the right moment. Harold doesn't know you're here. When he comes back, I want you in the bathroom with the door closed. When I give the signal, you come out." "What's the signal?" "I'll call his name. Just once. Harold. That's when you enter." We rehearsed the plan twice more, making sure everyone knew their role. Patricia would arrive with the notary as soon as Harold left. They would have the documents ready by the time he returned. Samantha would be on duty, watching the hallway, ready to alert us if Harold came back early. The hardest part was the waiting. I lay in my bed, eyes closed, listening to the beep of the monitors, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. 42 years of marriage ending in a hospital room, with lawyers and notaries and a daughter who had become my closest ally. I thought about what Rebecca had told me the night before, about the years she'd spent believing Harold's lies about me, the way he'd convinced her I was cold and distant and incapable of love. She'd believed him because he was her father, because children trust their parents, because Harold was so good at playing the victim. "He told me you never wanted me," she said. "He said you resented having to give up your career, that you blamed me for everything that went wrong in your marriage." None of that was true. I know that now, but I believed it for so long. I missed so many years with you because of his lies. We'll have years now. Whatever time I have left, we'll spend it together. About that, Rebecca hesitated. "Mom, when did you last talk to Dr. Patterson? Actually talk to him without Harold in the room?" "Weeks ago, before the last round of chemotherapy." "Why?" "Because I called him yesterday. I told him I was your daughter and I wanted to understand my mother's prognosis." He was surprised. He said he'd been trying to schedule a family meeting for days, but Harold kept saying you weren't strong enough. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What did Patterson say?" "He said the latest scans were complicated. The tumor is still there, but it's not growing as fast as they expected. With the new treatment protocol, he thinks you might have more time than he originally predicted." "How much more?" "Months. Maybe years, if you respond well to the next round. He wanted to discuss it with you, but Harold kept blocking the meeting. Years. Not weeks. Not days. Years. Harold had been lying to me about my own prognosis. He'd been filtering information, keeping me scared and hopeless, making sure I believed death was imminent, and he'd been counting down to a deadline that might not even exist. I reached for the phone under my mattress. "Patricia needs to know about this. It changes things." Patricia's reaction was immediate. "If Harold has been deliberately misrepresenting your medical condition, that's fraud. At minimum, it's evidence of intent to emotionally manipulate a vulnerable person. At maximum, it could be considered a form of elder abuse." "Can we add that to the revocation?" "We can add it to everything. Kathleen, this changes the entire picture. You're not a dying woman making final arrangements. You're a woman who was deliberately made to believe she was dying so her husband could pressure her into signing over her assets. The documents he brought last week, the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy." "Exactly. If he'd convinced you to sign those under false pretenses about your condition, it would be fraud. The fact that you didn't sign doesn't change the intent." I looked at Rebecca, at the anger burning in her eyes. My daughter, who had missed so many years because of Harold's lies. My daughter, who was finally seeing her father for what he really was. "We proceed as planned," I said. "But we add the medical information to the evidence. I want Harold to know that I was never as weak as he thought." That night, I slept better than I had in months. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The IV dripped its chemicals into my veins. But for the first time since the diagnosis, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. The next morning, Harold arrived earlier than usual. He was carrying flowers, a bouquet of white lilies, the kind people brought to funerals. "Good morning, sweetheart." He set the flowers on the table, not bothering to find a vase. "How are you feeling today?" "Tired. Always tired." "I know." He sat in his chair, pulled out his phone, scrolled through something I couldn't see. "Patterson wants to meet this afternoon to discuss options." "What kind of options?" "Comfort care, I think." making your remaining time as peaceful as possible. He reached for my hand, squeezed it with that familiar pressure. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'll be here for you. Every step of the way. I looked at his face, the concerned husband, the devoted partner, the man who had been lying to me about my own death so he could steal my money. Thank you, Harold. That means so much, he smiled, satisfied with my response. Then he stood, gathered his phone, checked his watch. I have a meeting this afternoon. Business stuff, nothing important. But I'll be back by dinner. We can talk about the Patterson meeting then. Of course. Go do what you need to do. He kissed my forehead, a dry brush of lips that meant nothing, and walked out of the room. I waited until his footsteps faded. Then I reached for the phone. Patricia, he just left. He'll be gone for at least 3 hours. It's time to execute phase 2. The notary is on his way. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Is Rebecca ready? I looked at the bathroom door, where my daughter was waiting. She's ready. We're all ready. Then let's finish this. I ended the call and lay back against the pillows. The monitors beeped, the IV dripped, and somewhere outside, Harold Morgan was driving to his last meeting as a wealthy man. When he returned, everything would be different. The notary's name was Gerald Whitmore, and he arrived exactly 27 minutes after Patricia's call. He was a small man in a dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase that contained the end of my marriage. He shook my hand with professional courtesy and began laying out documents on the adjustable table beside my bed. Mrs. Morgan, I need to verify your identity and mental competency before we proceed. Can you state your full name and date of birth? Kathleen Marie Morgan, née Sullivan, March 12, 1957. And you understand the documents you're about to sign? You're entering into these agreements of your own free will? I understand completely. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Gerald nodded, made a note on his tablet, and handed me the first stack of papers. The trust revocation agreement, 17 pages that would remove Harold Morgan from any claim to my father's money. I signed each page with a steady hand. The cancer had weakened my body, but not my grip, not my resolve. Each signature felt like a small victory, a brick removed from the prison Harold had built around me. Patricia watched from her chair, checking each document as I completed it. Rebecca stood by the window, her phone recording everything, creating a visual record that no court could dismiss. Samantha was at the door, monitoring the hallway, ready to signal if Harold returned early. The asset protection order, Gerald said, handing me the second stack. This prevents Mr. Morgan from accessing any accounts that were previously in your joint name. It also freezes the property transfer he initiated last month regarding your Charleston home. He tried to transfer the Charleston house? He filed paperwork 3 weeks ago. The transfer was pending your death to become final. This document blocks it permanently. I signed. Another brick removed. The medical directive revocation, Gerald continued. This eliminates Mr. Morgan's authority to make healthcare decisions on your behalf. All medical choices will now require your explicit consent, or in the event of incapacity, the consent of your designated representative. Who's my designated representative? Your daughter, Rebecca Morgan. We updated that this morning. I looked at Rebecca. My daughter, who Harold had spent 15 years pushing away. My daughter, who was now the only person I trusted with my life. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet. We still have to get through the next hour. The final document was the divorce petition. Patricia had prepared it the night before, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting an immediate separation of all assets. It wasn't strictly necessary since the trust revocation accomplished most of what I needed, but I wanted Harold to see it. I wanted him to know that I wasn't just taking back my money. I was taking back my life. Sign here, Gerald said. And here, and here. I signed. The last brick fell. Everything is in order. Gerald collected the documents, stamped each one with his notary seal, and placed them carefully in his briefcase. These will be filed with the county clerk within the hour. The revocations are effective immediately. What happens when Harold finds out? He'll receive formal notification tomorrow morning. But I suspect he'll find out considerably sooner than that. As if on cue, Samantha's voice came from the doorway. He's here. Just pulled into the parking garage. Patricia stood. Everyone in position. Remember, we do this calmly and professionally. Let him be the one who loses control. Rebecca moved to the bathroom, closing the door behind her. Gerald took the chair in the corner, the one partially hidden by the curtain. Patricia remained standing, her briefcase open on the table, the documents visible for anyone who cared to look. I lay back against my pillows and closed my eyes. The dying wife, waiting for her loving husband to return. The footsteps came closer. Heavy, confident, the tread of a man who believed he was walking into his future. The door opened. "Kathleen? I'm back early. The meeting was canceled and I thought—" He stopped. I heard his breath catch. I opened my eyes. Harold was standing in the doorway, his face frozen in an expression of confusion. He looked at Patricia, at Gerald in the corner, at the documents spread across my bedside table. "What is this?" His voice was sharp. "Who are these people?" "Harold." I said his name the way I'd rehearsed it, calm and clear. The signal. The bathroom door opened. Rebecca stepped out. "Hello, Dad." Harold's face went pale. "Rebecca, what are you doing here? What's going on?" "This is Gerald Whitmore," I said, gesturing to the notary. "He's just witnessed my signature on several important documents. My attorney, Patricia Webb, has been advising me on their contents." "What documents?" "Kathleen, you're not well. You can't be signing legal documents in your condition. Whatever these people have told you—" "The documents include a complete revocation of your access to my father's trust," I continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "A freeze on all asset transfers you initiated in the past 6 months, a medical directive removing you from any authority over my healthcare decisions, and a divorce petition, which Patricia will file tomorrow morning." Harold stood very still. I watched the information process across his face. Confusion, denial, understanding, and finally, rage. "You can't do this. Those assets are marital property. My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers can try," Patricia said, "but I should inform you that the trust was established by Kathleen's father specifically to prevent spousal interference. It has never been marital property. Your claim to it was always an illusion." "An illusion? I've been managing those investments for years. I have documentation—" "You have documentation of fraud," Patricia cut him off. "Transfers you made without Kathleen's knowledge or consent. Fees you charged to accounts you had no authority to access. Every transaction has been recorded, Mr. Morgan. Every manipulation has been documented." Harold turned to me, his face twisted with something that might have been desperation or fury. "Kathleen, please. I don't know what they've told you, but this isn't what it looks like. We're a team. We've always been a team." "Only 3 days," I said. He froze. "Only 3 days, and finally everything's mine." I reached under my mattress and pulled out the phone. "You said that yesterday, Harold, while you were holding my hand. While you thought I was asleep." I pressed play. Harold's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. The words he'd whispered to his dying wife, the confession he'd made without knowing it was being recorded. Only 3 days, and finally everything's mine. The color drained from Harold's face. He looked at the phone, at me, at the witnesses who had heard every word. "That's not— I didn't mean— Kathleen, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." I stopped the recording. "I understand that you've been waiting for me to die. I understand that you've been lying about my prognosis, blocking meetings with my doctors, making me believe I had days when I might have years. I understand that you've been planning to inherit my money and marry your mistress the moment I'm in the ground. Jennifer is just a friend. I don't know what you think you know. I found the letters, Harold, 147 of them, dating back 15 years. The apartment you've been paying for, the trips you've been taking, the life you've been living while I thought we were partners." Harold's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in 42 years, I saw him without his mask, without his excuses, without his careful explanations for everything he did wrong. He looked small, ordinary. Not the powerful husband I'd feared for decades, but just a man who had been caught in his own lies. "You can't prove any of this," he said finally. "My lawyers will contest every document. They'll say you were mentally incapacitated, that these people manipulated you. I have witnesses, Harold. The notary, Patricia, Rebecca, Samantha, who's been watching you mistreat me for weeks. And I have the recording, which proves beyond any doubt that you were counting down to my death for financial gain. This isn't over. You think you've won, but it's over. I pressed the call button beside my bed. Security is on their way. You're not welcome in this hospital anymore. If you attempt to contact me, my doctors, or any member of my medical team, I'll have you arrested for harassment. Harold looked at Rebecca. You're going to let her do this? I'm your father. Rebecca's voice was cold. You're the man who tried to steal my mother's money while she was dying, who lied to me for 15 years about who she really was, who had an affair for longer than I've been an adult. She stepped closer to him. You're not my father. You're just a stranger who happened to raise me. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. They looked at Harold, at the documents, at the women arrayed against him. Morgan? One of them said. You need to come with us. Harold's last look at me was pure hatred. The mask was gone. All that remained was the man underneath, the man who had been lying to me for 42 years. This isn't over, he said again. Yes, I said. It is. They led him away. His footsteps faded down the hallway, growing quieter until they disappeared entirely. I lay back against my pillows and let out a breath I'd been holding for 6 weeks. For 15 years, for 42 years, it was finally over. The morning after Harold was escorted out, Dr. Patterson came to my room with news that changed everything. Mrs. Morgan, I don't know how to explain this, but your latest scans are remarkable. He pulled up images on his tablet, showing them to me and Rebecca. The tumor has shrunk by 40% since we started the new treatment protocol. The metastases in your liver are stable. Some of them have actually decreased in size. What does that mean? It means we were wrong about your prognosis. Not wrong about the cancer, but wrong about the timeline. With continued treatment, you're looking at months, possibly years. There's even a chance, a small one, that we could achieve remission. I stared at the images. The dark masses that had been consuming my body were smaller now, retreating. The death sentence I'd been handed was being commuted. Harold told me I had days, I said. He said Dr. Patterson had confirmed it. Patterson frowned. I never told him that. In fact, I've been trying to schedule a meeting with both of you for weeks to discuss these findings. Your husband kept saying you weren't strong enough for the conversation. He was lying. He's been lying about everything. The doctor's face shifted, understanding dawning. Mrs. Morgan, I'm so sorry. If I'd known, I should have insisted on speaking with you directly. It's not your fault. Harold is very good at controlling information. Rebecca squeezed my hand. The important thing is that you're going to be okay, that you have time now. Time. That was what Harold had tried to steal from me. Not just my money, but my hope. He'd made me believe I was dying faster than I was, that every day was one step closer to the grave. He'd weaponized my own mortality against me, but he hadn't won. The tumor was shrinking. The doctors were optimistic. And Harold was gone, along with every claim he'd ever had to my life. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Harold contested nothing in the end. Patricia had made it clear that any attempt to fight would result in criminal charges for fraud, elder abuse, and emotional manipulation. His lawyers advised him to take what he could get, which wasn't much. The prenuptial agreement I'd forgotten we had, signed 42 years ago when I still had my own attorney, protected my premarital assets. The trust revocation protected everything else. Harold walked away with the house we'd shared, his retirement account, and nothing more. Jennifer Blake was gone before the ink was dry on the divorce papers. I heard through Rebecca that she'd ended things the moment she learned about Harold's financial situation. The wealthy older man she'd been waiting to marry turned out to be a 69-year-old with a modest pension and a reputation for trying to steal from his dying wife. Not exactly the prize she'd been holding out for. I moved out of the hospital a week after the confrontation. Not to my old house, which held too many memories of Harold, but to an apartment downtown, a modern building with views of the Charlotte skyline. Rebecca helped me decorate. choosing colors and furniture that reflected who I was rather than who Harold had wanted me to be. Warm yellows and soft blues, plants on every windowsill, art that made me smile instead of impress. Samantha came to visit sometimes, bringing stories from the hospital and the gentle kindness that had made her my ally in the first place. She'd been promoted to head nurse after testifying about Harold's behavior, her honesty earning her respect from colleagues who had seen too many families mistreat vulnerable patients. "You saved my life," I told her once. "That phone under the mattress, the opportunity to record Harold. Without you, none of this would have happened. You saved yourself," she said. "I just gave you the tools." The cancer continued to respond to treatment. By the 6-month mark, the tumor had shrunk by 60%. The metastases were stable. Patterson used words like remarkable and unprecedented, words that had once belonged to my death sentence but now described my recovery. I wasn't cured. The cancer was still there, would always be there in some form, but it was no longer consuming me. It was no longer the thing that defined my remaining time. I had months, possibly years, enough time to rebuild, enough time to live. Rebecca and I made up for lost years. The 15 years Harold had stolen from us, turning daughter against mother with lies and manipulation. We talked for hours, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, learning who we'd become in each other's absence. She introduced me to her life in Atlanta, her job as an architect, her partner Diana, whom Harold had never allowed her to mention. I met them for dinner, watched my daughter happy and loved in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. "I'm sorry I believed him," Rebecca said during one of our calls. "All those years I thought you were the cold one. I thought you didn't want me around." Harold was very good at making people believe things. I believed him too for 42 years. How do you do it? How do you move forward after that kind of betrayal? I thought about the question. It was one I'd asked myself every day since the hospital room, since the moment Harold's mask had finally fallen. You don't move forward by pretending it didn't happen. You move forward by acknowledging what was done to you, and then choosing not to let it define you. Harold took 42 years of my life. He doesn't get to take whatever's left. Patricia helped me set up a charitable foundation with part of my father's trust, the Morgan Sullivan Foundation, dedicated to supporting women in abusive and manipulative relationships. We funded legal aid, counseling, emergency housing, escape plans for women who felt trapped the way I had felt trapped for decades. "You're turning your pain into something meaningful," Patricia said at the foundation's launch event. "I'm turning it into something useful. There's a difference." The summer after the divorce, I returned to Charleston for the first time in years. Not to the house Harold had tried to steal, but to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I stood at their graves, my mother who had always worried about Harold, my father who had protected my inheritance without my even knowing. "You were right," I told them, "both of you, and I'm sorry I didn't listen." The breeze stirred the azaleas around the headstones. I imagined my mother's voice, the soft Southern accent that had always carried a note of skepticism about Harold Morgan. "Better late than never, Kathleen. Better late than never." I stayed in Charleston for a week, walking the streets I'd known as a girl, visiting the bakery where my mother used to buy my birthday cakes. The city was different now, more modern, more crowded, but something of the old Charleston remained, a gentleness, a sense of place. On my last night, Rebecca called with news. "Harold had a heart attack. He's in the hospital, same one where you were. The irony is almost too perfect. Is he going to be okay? The doctors think so. Diana says I should feel something about it, but I don't. He's just a stranger who used to be my father." "You don't have to feel anything," I said. "Not forgiveness, not anger, not even indifference. You just have to feel whatever's true for you." "What do you feel?" I thought about Harold in a hospital bed, alone. No wife to hold his hand, no daughter to advocate for his care. I thought about the 42 years we'd shared, the lies and the control and the slow suffocation of a marriage that had never really been a partnership. "I feel free," I said. "For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely, entirely free." When I returned to Charlotte, the cancer was still stable. The foundation was thriving. Rebecca was planning a visit for the holidays. Life was not what I'd expected, not what I'd feared, but something new and strange and beautiful. I stood at my apartment window, watching the sun set over the city skyline, the same sun that had risen over my hospital bed when Harold whispered his confession, the same sun that would rise tomorrow and the day after, and for however many days I had left. Harold had thought 3 days. He had been wrong about everything. I pulled out my phone and texted Rebecca, "Dinner next week? I want to hear about the new project." Her response came immediately. "Already made reservations. Love you, Mom." Love you, Mom. The words Harold had tried to make impossible. The words that had survived everything he'd done. I set down the phone and watched the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow, there would be treatment and foundation meetings and calls with Patricia about the latest legal developments. Tomorrow, there would be the ongoing work of rebuilding a life that had been stolen from me. But tonight, I just stood at the window and breathed. In and out. Alive and grateful and free. 3 days, Harold had said. It had been 312, and counting.